Hi everyone, this is Jim. This video covers my second round game at the Pacific Coast Open, or the Western States Open, rather, in Reno. The time control for this tournament was 40 moves in 2 hours, followed by game in an hour. So each side gets 3 hours, plus a 5-second delay per move. And so it leads to potentially games that could last over 6 hours. So the rounds are far apart. Round 1 started at 12, and round 2 started at 7 p.m. So I had a break. My first round game was kind of short, as you saw. So I took it easy, just relaxed. And like I said, I was feeling in pretty good shape after my first round game. Even though I lost, I felt like I had was seeing things pretty well over the board, which is a key part of this. So anyway, my opponent here with the white pieces, I got black a second time in a row. My opponent had the white pieces. He had a rating of 1930, and my rating for this tournament was 1833. So he kicked off with d4, went knight f6, he went c4, and so we've got a mainline position here. After e6, I'm going to go for the Nimzo-Indian, and he allows it. He plays knight c3. So I go for that, and he plays a3, the Saemisch variation. So immediately asking black if he really intends to trade that perfectly good bishop for this knight, and of course black does. That's the whole idea of the Nimzo-Indian here, is to take that. Although you don't rush to take it, you wait till you're asked, so that white has kind of wasted a move there. And then you strike in the center. d5 is a common move here, but I prefer to play with c5. I often play with c5 with the Nimzo-Indian, and just try and undermine the dark squares in the center. And he played a very unusual move. I mean, I would think, well, I looked it up. The most common moves here are e3, that was the top choice, and the second choice was f3, with the idea of building up to e4, both reasonable ways to play. He played the rare move queen c2. This was in the book, and I looked at it with a chess engine. It seems to be still playable. But it's definitely a little bit offbeat. It's almost as if white is mixing systems. This would be the classical Nimzo-Indian if you play queen c2 without this exchange, pushing a3 and forcing the exchange on c3. So anyway, it's interesting play. It's a new position for me. I just continued with knight c6, which I thought was logical. And I'm just putting pressure on this pawn. And I figure he has to defend it, so I was expecting either e3 or knight to f3 here. And he really surprised me by playing e4. So anyway, this is a novel position. You might want to take a look at it and decide for yourself what you would do before I talk about what I did. So what I'm going to do here is... well, the reason why I think this is a good position to talk about a little bit is because it's an example of things that happen. Sometimes people who play the openings play them a little too quickly. They don't, go through in their minds the threats and the reasons why the moves are played in a particular order. And so they don't notice that something wrong has happened. But definitely something wrong has already happened here. And I asked him after the game if this was a deliberate gambit or if it was a mistake. And he said it was just a mistake. So I thought about it. The Saemisch is an active opening for white, and so it's not unthinkable that there might be a gambit here. But this is not anything. This was just a mistake. So I went ahead and took the pawn. So my point there, I guess, is that whenever you're going through the opening, you should think a little bit. You shouldn't just play the standard moves. Because if I had just played a normal move here, then white really has an excellent position. He can defend that pawn with knight f3, and he's got a big center and attacking chances. So I really have to take that pawn to try and challenge his setup. But I have to think about it a little bit carefully and make sure I'm not walking into some really dangerous gambit. But I couldn't see how he would turn this into something especially scary. So, but he did some interesting things here. Even though he had made a mistake, he made the game complicated. So he started out with bishop g5, so pinning my knight and threatening to play e5 at some point. e5 immediately, I can just take it, so I don't have to do anything about e5 right away. I could play with d6, or I could castle. But I decided I wanted to block that right away because It's often an idea in the Saemisch and these kinds of openings to get pressure on this light squared diagonal. So I want to try and stop that pawn from coming forward any further, even if it's not threatening to win any material. So he goes with bishop d3. He is setting up, and maybe he has ideas of taking this pawn, and then if I take back, then he can push this pawn forward with an attack on h7. So I decided first to ask this bishop a question, whether I wanted to trade or back off. There was some problem I thought I saw with bishop back to h4. And in fact, he didn't play bishop h4. He played bishop d2. But when I looked at it with the chess engine, there doesn't seem to be any particular issue with bishop h4. So I guess that was playable as well. I think maybe I was considering taking on c3 and then popping my knight in here. And in this particular configuration, the bishop can take back and put pressure on my knight. So I wasn't so tempted. I think that's what I was planning if his bishop had dropped back to h4. Anyway, I played with d6. Oh, by the way, this is a long game, so I'm going to maybe go over some parts kind of quickly. So even though I come out of the opening a pawn up, the chess engine gives some compensation to white here. So it's not like I'm just a clear pawn up. I still have to fight here. Let's see. He goes knight e2, developing his knight in a way that doesn't block the f pawn. I decide to go ahead and take here anyway at this time, even though I don't get my my knight to d4. That was where I wanted to place it. I decided I might as well take there rather than waiting for him to take. He was threatening to take, and if I take back, he was actually going to win a pawn there on d4. Okay, so I castle, he castles, and now I thought for a long time here, I remembered my lesson from the previous game, which if you recall, there was a point where I forgot to do a tactical survey. And also, at any point in the game, in addition to just tactics, you should be thinking about what are your opponent's plans here. And I figured White's plan here was to push the f-pawn forward. He's just trying to break down the center and open things up for those light squared bishop, well, both bishops, his light squared and his dark squared bishop, wants to just open things up and try to get a raging attack going. So what can I do about this potential plan of f4? This is another point where you might want to talk or think about this for a while. So if you want to pause the video before I talk about it, go ahead. Okay, the move I played was rook to e8. So it's a developing move. I'm getting the rook out onto a file where it might be doing some more good. And it also is, it's acting against this f4 idea because I hope to station a knight on this e5 square and maintain this blockade of the center. So that's my idea with rook e8. I think it's a pretty good move here. I was happy with how that worked out. He played rook a to b1. I went to b6 because I didn't want to be defending that pawn forever. I want to be able to develop my bishop. He played rook f to d1, so he's getting his pieces on active squares, and he's also taking a look at this backwards d-pawn here, which is potential problem in my position. And there's a pin, a potential pin, I guess, against my queen here. So I decided to get my queen off of that file right away. I went queen to e7, and now he did go f4. So he did have this plan of f4. It's a little surprising that he moved his rook over here first and then played f4, but I also have maybe misplaced my queen here. I'm just not clear. So I went ahead and took. There is one interesting line here the chess engine points out, which I really didn't think about, but the move knight to g4 here turns out to be pretty good. So the knight is threatening to come into e3 with a fork. This e3 square is unguarded. I didn't really spot this idea. So knight to g4 would have been a good move here. Let's see. You could play something like bishop d2, protecting e3, then taking. Say he takes with the bishop, and then I could bring the knight here. And it's a slightly better configuration than what I got in the game. So that's an interesting idea that I missed. I just took right away. He took back with the knight, and then I'm going to play knight to e5. But I wanted to get my bishop off the back rank, and I saw a moment here where I could play a developing move for the bishop with tempo because it hits the rook. So bishop g4 hits his rook. Plays rook e1. I go knight e5. And I'm happy with my opening play. I think, this completes the opening. The pieces are all developed. I have some weaknesses, but he has weak pawns too. They're a little more advanced. White has more space, but white is down a pawn. White has the bishop pair, so that's something he can look forward to in the long run. Sometimes the bishop pair is partial compensation for being down a pawn as well. Let's see. He went with knight to d5 here. That's also a pretty nice looking square. The chess engine says it's okay if I just trade it off, but I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I should keep his pawns separated like that, and their weaknesses that I can target later. So I just dropped my queen back to d8. I need to keep the queen in touch with the knight so that he doesn't take here. This move always comes with tempo too. Knight takes f6 is a check. But I want to be able to take back with a queen and not be forced to mess up my pawn structure there. And at this point, he decides to preserve his bishop. My knight. There was always this idea I might take his bishop with my knight. Although I'm not particularly inclined to play it right here because he's got his bishop and his knight coordinating on f6. But there might be some sequence here like that. Maybe knight takes d5 first, followed by knight takes d3 to get rid of the bishop pair. That might be a pretty good outcome for black. So white retreated his bishop here, got it out of the way of those kind of ideas. And I get my last piece into the game, the rook, over to c8, taking a look at this pawn, which I have some pressure on with the knight and the rook coordinating. And he's got it defended by the bishop, and he played knight to e3. So his bishop and knight together are defending that pawn. Plus he's harassing my bishop over here, and I don't especially want to give that up. So I drop. I don't even want to trade it off. I want to keep that bishop. So I could drop my bishop back to e6, targeting his pawn, and he played rook b to d1. Yeah, so putting some counter pressure on my d pawn once again, and directly threatening to take the knight. So there's a really the chess engine thinks the best move here is queen e7 or queen c7. It actually likes queen c7 even better. That unpins this pawn here, so my knight is defended, and I've still got a lot of pressure here on the c pawn. I went and took the pawn right away, and there is technically a problem with this move. I'm not going to ask you if you can see it because it's some kind of weird computer variation. I don't think it's realistic that most people would spot this. I mean, my opponent just did the natural thing, and we traded off on c4. And if you just do that, everything is okay. But the chess engine points out that if you take with the bishop first, bishop takes c4, and then I take back. Then instead of continuing to exchange, you have this move knight to f5. And this is actually starting to give some compensation for white. The chess engine rates this as nearly equal. So there's just a problem here. The d pawn is hanging, and it's a fork when the knight takes there. So I can't just play something simple like bishop to e6 to chase that knight away. So let's see. The engine gives the line rook e6 defending, and then e5, exploiting the pin, hitting the knight, hitting the pawn. So the knight has to move, knight to d5 to shield that pawn from the rook, and then e takes d6. And well, let's see. I have to trade up this rook, I guess. Rook takes, and then white takes the bishop. That's best, and he has still pressure on this file. So what's the count here? I didn't lose the exchange, so the pieces are all even. I have a queen, a rook, bishop, and knight, and so does white. I have 5 pawns, and white only has 4, so white is still a pawn down But this pawn is a real nuisance, and it's supported by this knight, which is not so easy to chase away. It takes a little while to organize some kind of, I can't just push G6 right away, for example, because he can take on H6. So, and my pieces are just a little bit awkward. This bishop is out here. On the other hand, from White's point of view, White had to expose his queen to a potential discovered attack. It's it's the confidence of the chess engine that there's no great move here that the bishop has that can exploit the discovered attack on the queen. Anyway, interesting. So that's why I say that's kind of a computer line. But technically, this move I played of knight takes c4 was a mistake, and that's the reason why. So fortunately for me, my opponent didn't find that. He just did the natural thing, took back, and I kept taking, and I had to take back. And then he pushed to e5. So he had spotted this e5 idea, which is pretty good. And this pawn once again is hitting my knight, and it's hitting the d pawn. I decided to throw in this move, bishop takes f1, and he took back with the rook, and that actually makes my life a little bit easier. So let's back up. Instead of taking with the rook, he should have probably just gone ahead and taken my knight, and then I was planning to exchange one pair of rooks and then retreat the bishop. And what is this position? It is I have at the moment 6 pawns, and he has 4 pawns, but he can probably grab 1 pawn here, and he's got some play against my king maybe, but I judged this position to be okay. I thought I would still be better with this passed pawn in the center and a majority on the queen side, and I thought this situation over here on the king side was not too dangerous, and the chess engine still gives an edge to black in this position, about not a full pawn edge, but a slight, maybe half a pawn edge, somewhere around there, somewhere between half a pawn and 1 pawn up. So I'm still winning even in this line, but the way White played it, it's a little bit easier for me. He took on f1 with his rook, and now I have a nice move here. So if you want to pause the video and find the best move for black in this position. Okay, I'm going to start talking about it. This is an interesting position. There's all these pins going. So there's this pin on my d pawn, and so that can't really move except to go forward. There's also this pin on his bishop, pinning it against the queen. So his bishop can't really go forward either. And his rook got distracted away from defense of his e-pawn. So I can just grab that pawn, and I did. I think that's the best move. It's also possible just to move the knight away. If you found that move, that's, I think, still winning for black as well. But I think rook e5 is the simplest and best move here. So he played queen b2 to unpin. And he's, once again, he's got this pressure on f6, which he's been kind of playing for the whole game. And, at this point, he decides to cash it in. So he just exchanges everything on e6. And, well, it may be look a little bit strange to go into an endgame a couple pawns down, but I think White actually has some chances in this endgame, not to win, but to hold a draw. So maybe after rook takes, I should have just taken with the pawn and kept the queens on. But, that's a questionable decision as well, because with queens on, the fact that my king situation is weak is a real problem. So I took with the queen, and if he wanted to damage my pawns, he had to go all the way into the rook and pawn endgame. So now, my king position is weakened, but there's no queen on the board to exploit that. All he has is the rook, which is going to pick up a pawn and attack some more pawns. So I played an interesting move here. I think just the natural king g7 defending is okay, but I was a little bit worried about, the chess engine tells me that's okay. But I was a little bit worried about it getting into kind of a passive position. So I played a more active move here, if you want to see if you can spot an active move for black in this position. Okay, the move I played here is rook to c3. Get my rook off the back rank and round up this pawn. And if he wants to take here, I thought, well, my king would come forward, and then his rook would have to move, and I could take the pawn. What I didn't account for, which is kind of interesting here, if he takes, he didn't play this way. Let's see. Yeah, that's a new variation. If he takes, and I bring my king forward to attack his rook, he could play this move. I didn't spot this idea when I was planning my rook to c3 move. I didn't spot that idea that he could come back to f3 and defend that way. So in this position, I really shouldn't play king g7. What I should do is just take the pawn, and then if he takes over here, which is best, I can chase this rook away. But this is, I think, winning for black. These passed pawns are over here away from his king, whereas my king is over here near his pawns, and I can slow them down, and he will have trouble slowing mine down. So I think this is still a winning endgame for black, but that would have been interesting if he'd if he had just grabbed that pawn right away. And say he decided to save his pawn over here on the queen side, which, will slow down my pawn, so that makes a lot of sense. And now if I put my rook behind the pawn, which is one thing I thought of here, he can just defend it. So it's not so simple here. I decided to just move my king forward at this point and hold on to my pawns. So he played rook to d2. He just brought his rook back. And I pushed on with a5. I decided to fix his pawn and just treat that as a target. He went rook to d4, defending his pawn. I think he doesn't have a clear idea at this point. And I have some ideas. My main idea here is to try and create a passed pawn on the queen side. He went king to f2. I pushed the b5 pawn forward. He harassed me a little bit with some checks. And then he took one check, and then he took. And then he went rook to a4, got in front of my pawn and blockaded it. I brought my king out. He came back for another check. And now I can... I could have blocked with my rook, but I decided I wanted to try and bring my king into the game. I'm going to need my king's help to push this pawn forward. He played h3, just defending his rook there. And I went rook to b4. This helps me get my pawn one step closer. He went rook g7, which is an interesting way to try and harass my pawns. He's attacking this pawn, he's attacking this one. But I thought, well, this was a point at which I could get my rook behind the passed pawn. I thought I should take advantage of that. I think it's also playable just to keep pushing that pawn. But well, I played like this, rook b7. And let's see, he went back over here. I was thinking he might go after the h-pawn, but my king can just come to g6, and his rook is not really doing a whole lot there. So he came back to stop my pawn, and I put my rook behind the pawn, and he put his rook in front of it. And now I definitely need the king. So the king comes over, and he played king to g3. I think he's going for some counterplay against my pawns here. The chess engine, by the way, thinks that in this position he should play king to e1 and just stay with my king and make it difficult for me to advance this pawn. Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work out, actually. This is a long game, and I looked through some lines there. Here, let's show you the engine line went something like this. And it's not clear. I could start pushing the pawn again. He can maybe get his king in front of the pawn, and his rook can also start gobbling up pawns over here. So, yeah, it's not at all a clean scenario, not a simple win. So, I have all the winning chances here, but it's not clear if this is a forced win or not. I think I just have to keep trying and hoping for little mistakes from my opponent. And I think king g3 is one of those little mistakes. I played f5. I had some ideas to keep his king out of certain squares, but also I wanted to be able to lift my rook up and defend the h-pawn if he brings his king forward. I couldn't stop his king from marching in like this. But But if his king does come forward to that square and I lift my rook up to this square, he can't really make any progress from that point. He has to come back. So he spotted that idea and he just came back with his king. I started marching over to help my pawn queen, and he went king to f4. And once again, this is another one of those little mistakes that the chess engine thinks that he should keep marching with his king in this direction and just kind of follow me over here, and then swing the rook back when I get over to this side of the board. I guess that's the key idea for the defense. And at the end of those lines, by the way, I could not find a way to force a win, but at the same time, the chess engine was still giving black an advantage. So it's a little bit complicated. So I can't say for sure if it's a draw or not, but certainly better drawing chances for white in those lines than in what he played. Let's see. So I went king c5, coming over here to harass his rook, giving up the f-pawn. But I figured I could hold everything together with my rook. So rook to a6 prevents his king from stealing any more pawns. He pushes the g-pawn forward, and I think that is finally the losing move. I think finally I have a winning endgame after this. There's one more drawing idea, which I thought was kind of interesting and important. You see this in a lot of rook and pawn endgames, so I'm going to show this one. And that is, instead of putting a pawn to g4, play king to g4. So this is a different kind of drawing idea than we saw in the previous one. I'm going to try and push this pawn forward, and he will drop back. Oh no, he moves his rook to the side, and then I push the pawn forward. He takes my pawn. I push my pawn forward. He comes back to defend. I push it all the way. So he had just enough time to grab a pawn and then come back to defend my pawn. And now I start marching my king. Let's see, I go king b4. He goes king h5. He's going after my last pawn here. I go king forward, and he pushes his g-pawn forward now. I go king forward, hitting his rook, and the rook sacrifices itself. And yeah, I need to take with the king. I want the rook here to be defending my pawn. And then finally, this is the idea. At this point, I really have nothing better than to trade. He takes, and this is the draw. This pawn is going for a touchdown, and my king is way over on the other side of the board, and so at some point, white can't win, but at some point I'm going to have to sacrifice my rook for that pawn, and it will be a draw. So that was the last drawing idea that that white had rather, and he gave it up by playing g4. So now my moves on the queen side here are just too quick. I attack his rook, he dropped back, push the pawn forward. He went with h4, played my king to b4. In case I need to do something with my rook over here, I want my king out of the way, and also I need my king to support this pawn coming forward. So he played h5. I pushed my pawn to a3. He played g5. And because I had moved my king forward, I get to play this move, rook a5 check. And he resigned at this point. But the check allows me to take this pawn, and his king can't come forward. I can't say that. His king could come forward to f6 there, but with my rook on g5, his king would be cut off from these two pawns. I would gather up this pawn, and so that would be clearly winning. So he just resigned at this point. But notice it's important that this rook is free to move and my king is defending the pawn, and also my king was out of the way of my rook. I gave my rook a little more scope by moving my king forward. So anyway, pretty interesting game, and that left me at 50% after 2 rounds. So stay tuned for further coverage of the Western States Open in Reno. See you then. Bye.